Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Angela. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning, everyone watching us. We are live at IMSM on LinkedIn, Facebook, and today YouTube too. I have Angela and Steve with me. They are both area managers, and myself, I'm a lead auditor and happen to be a business development manager for the company. And the purpose of this live show today is to discuss our findings for the latest quarter in 2020, the whole year 2020, and talk about some trends and what we can do for you guys and help you improve your activities. So before you start, any recent questions coming from customers?
Well, really from myself, in terms of an area manager, questions that I'm seeing and sort of trends that I'm seeing is really uplifts in different standards that I haven't really been speaking to customers about before, such as 20,701, which is information security and business continuity. And really questions that I'm being asked by customers is, they have clients that are obviously asking them, do they have these standards in place? Is it the pandemic of 2020 and the world that we're in at the minute and businesses being reactive as opposed to proactive that's driving this trend and this uplift in different standards?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting. Yeah, it's a really interesting question, Angela. I think when I sort of reviewed the survey that IMSM did around sort of 2020 trends around Q3, Q4, and sort of referenced that back to the ISO survey of 2019, where we're seeing a huge increase, especially in Q3 and Q4, of those three standards. If you look at 27,001, only 3% of the implementations carried out in 2019 were 27,001 information and data security. But if you look at the Q3, Q4 interest level around that particular standard, it's gone up by 400-500%. And I think that can be an effect of obviously COVID, because organizations are looking to prove to their stakeholders and their shareholders, their customers, their employees, that they are fit for purpose in this new world and want to make sure that they can continue to protect people's data and information. And I sort of saw the same sort of trends as well around business continuity, as you just mentioned earlier, around 22,301. And again, that to me, from my sort of background, I spent 20 years in business continuity and disaster recovery. A lot of it tends to be that sort of reactive, where the world has changed with more people now working from home. And so business continuity plans need to be changed and adapted. And the ISO 22301 is a perfect way for an organization to make sure that they are suitable, that if there was a disaster, whether it's a major disaster or a minor incident, that they can still continue to work as a business. And I think the interest in that standard went up by 300%. It was ridiculous. It was a huge increase in that. The really, really interesting one for me, though, was medical devices, 13485. Back in 2019, it was negligible, the amount of implementations. It didn't even show up as a whole percent. But the interest levels were 400, 500, 600% more across Q3 and Q4. Now, that could be because organizations are looking to help in the fight against COVID and want to be able to support our great NHS by making sure that they have the correct standards to be an approved supplier, etc., and bring new products and new services to market, which have been done. And everyone's seen those in the press through vaccines, through new PPE equipment, through other areas that help in the NHS. But we did see a slight drop between Q3 and Q4. Now, my take on that could be that organizations had rushed in to try and support the NHS and had got all the information. Or maybe it was the fact that the government was potentially saying, or the world was saying, by Q4, this is all going to be over and it's going to be back to life as normal. So that was an interesting stat. It didn't drop a lot, but only by about 10 or 15% between Q3 last year and Q4 calendar years. But that's the sort of trends I've seen around far more interest in business continuity, I think, because businesses have been disrupted and that has caused that reaction. They've also want to make sure that they are supporting their customers, their suppliers, and they're known as a good, safe pair of hands. 27,001 in the same way. Information now is spread because people working from home all over the place. So they want to make sure that's controlled and managed and everything's pulled together correctly. And then 13485, I think the big interest in that is around supporting our great NHS, as well as improving and being able to supply into the supply chain and make sure, again, that business has got the correct standards in place. And that's kind of what I took from reading the survey. Some really, really interesting stats. Obviously, 9001 still a perfect standard for an organization to start with, to make sure that they are a quality company, the sort of quality standard. And that dropped a little bit between 2019 and the interest levels, but not a huge amount. So that's still at the sort of benchmark standard. And again, health and safety and environmental, again, still high up there in terms of the percentages, but nowhere near the increase levels that I've seen across, I won't call them bespoke or niche ISO standards, but what appears to be the far, far more important. Now, one other point is I ran my own survey, which kind of mirrored the IMSM and the ISO survey for 2019, asking a simple question: what's the most important ISO in this sort of COVID world that we live in? Now, 9001 came out at 25% of the votes, 27,001, 63%, and business continuity 13%, which kind of mirrors the survey that IMSM have done and that we pulled together. But it's what businesses see as the most important ISOs in this sort of COVID world that we live in now.
It's a very interesting survey. Shall we, Stephen, go through sectors as well? Because as we say, it changes over each sector, and there's some very, very interesting findings in each of the most important sectors we've been surveying ever since the pandemic started last year. So if you guys don't mind, let's have a quick look on how data appears per sector. So scrolling down. Okay, first sector, legal services, seconded by finance. Very interesting finding. Legal services, 27,001, up to nearly 30%.
Yeah,
that's an interesting finding.
Yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are on this, Angela, but from my point of view, legal are processing a lot of data and information for organisations and need to ensure that they have the correct processes and procedures in place to protect and govern that type of information. So that doesn't surprise me at all for legal.
I also think that many legal companies look at standards and implementations on behalf of their customers. And interestingly enough, today's news brought up some information with regards to the Royal United Services Institute think tank publication on fraud. So they started the research in July last year and just published the survey. I highly recommend to everyone to check it up and look it up and see what the think tank has done. But apparently fraud is considered to be a huge problem, even here in the UK, and there is a proposition to the government to prioritize it heavily inside of how new operations are being designed under the current COVID circumstances. What's your take on that one, guys?
Do you want to cover that, Angela, or do you want me to cover that one?
Happy enough for you to cover it.
Yeah, if you look at that particular, I've not read it page to page. It's about 60 pages long, but I've had a good viewing of it, and we'll do a post around it a little bit later on LinkedIn to make sure everyone that's watching here can get access to the sort of raw data from it. But if you look at the sort of financial market and some of the areas where fraud is becoming more prevalent, you know, if you look at even like a World Economic Forum survey said 6.1 trillion will be potentially lost to fraud in the next sort of 5 years, which is a ridiculous amount of money. And you look at the financial institutes that are looking to protect their customers' data, their customers' information, their personal identifiable information, or PII. And the document to me spelled out a couple of key areas. One was that businesses really need to take fraud incredibly serious, that it's very difficult to stop some of the attacks coming in, but there are technologies and platforms and services that are available to do that. And that businesses also, one of the areas where they need to look at their wider ecosystem. They need to start looking at their suppliers and the potential collateral damage that can come from attacks on supply chains. And we've all seen in the press around SolarWinds and lots of other attacks on third-party suppliers that has a material impact against the company that works with those suppliers. But from the sort of ISO standards, you know, we ran a series of webinars, and we ran one on business continuity. And you know, it's great for an organization to adopt ISO standards like business continuity or information data security, quality, whichever one it is, to help improve their business and processes. But what they should do also is show the world that they are a fit for purpose and they're a great business, but they should also ask their suppliers to return the favor, to make sure that they have the correct levels of compliance and governance in place, that they have adopted standards like business continuity and information and data security. And I think one of the key takeaways that I read from that document was around, yeah, it's a scary world out there. There's lots of attacks on finance, legal, manufacturing, engineering, the NHS, fraud, individuals at home. But there are things that you can do about it to improve your business processes, to make sure you've looked at the areas of third-party risk management against encryption, all the different areas, email security, web security, cloud, and looked at all these different areas and addressed it. But it's great to do that, but you need a key framework in place to show the world that you've actually done that work. And, you know, it's a really interesting read. I look forward to reading the rest of it later today when I get a spare 5 minutes. But that's kind of my take on that document. It was a really, really interesting read. And I think governments now are starting to say, you know, enough is enough. We need to stop this. We need to try and reduce it as much as possible.
Mentioning webinars, guys, I must congratulate you on the impressive delivery on the latest business continuity webinar, and I'm so much looking forward to the next one on February the 4th. It is information security, ISO 27001. So it's gonna be good, isn't it? Interesting.
Oh, sorry, just to follow up just a couple of points that Steve raised. From my own experience, I worked in banking for a number of years and faced a couple of financial disasters in my career. One of them being was I worked for part of the RBS group, a back system failure. And it is so important to ensure that you have that business continuity in place. It did present a lot of opportunities in terms of public opportunities, people committing fraud in different areas. So it's ensuring that you do have that. It is so important to have that in place, not only for your customers, but also for your own business reputation as well. So just sort of personal experience in career.
One of the areas that people also want to, I think, explore, and I certainly, when I'm talking to my sort of customers around the sort of implementation of standards like business continuity, is that they shouldn't just see it as a cost. Mm-hmm. It's not just a cost of doing business that, oh, right, we've got this overhead. Yes, IMSM can come in and they can do support us on this and they can do all the heavy lifting and help us gain the ISO standards. But it's about the positive impact it can also have on a business. You know, the positive PR that they can get from it is one area, but also looking at the processes. And I think almost more importantly, the hidden processes inside of the business that we can help tease out and make sure that they are protected and covered during that as well. So it shouldn't be seen as just a cost of doing business by attaining an ISO standard like business continuity or information data security. There are a lot of positive benefits, you know, improved processes, better compliance, you know, more PR and publicity. And, you know, IMSM, you know, I've used their service before, and they do a great job at helping businesses then write things like simple things like press releases. You know, organizations need to shout from the rooftops that they take their customers' information, data, and the fact that they want to be in business long term, regardless of small impact or major disaster, that they can still be a company to do business with. And people shouldn't forget the value that that can bring to an organization.
It's definitely an investment in your business.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. And shall we just quickly discuss the sports and leisure as well hospitality sectors, where we for the first time can observe such an interest in ISOs before we actually close the meeting, because, you know, we promised not to take too long in discussing it over a cup of tea. So just saying this, for the first time, we actually have viable quantity of data to extrapolate a survey. Interestingly enough, we can see that nearly 70% of the companies in the sports and leisure sector manifested interest in implementing ISO standards, focusing on 9001. And my reading is that because previously they knew little about standards, they're now starting with the basics, which is 9001. And the hospitality, what we can see at hospitality is because the sector was so badly hit during the previous year, so they have been exploring ways to become more resistant, more resilient, and more flexible. So what we can see in here is the highest level of interest in business continuity. Angela, Stephen?
Yeah, I would totally agree with you, Maria. Also, we're sort of in a unique situation with Brexit in the UK and especially in Northern Ireland. And I do feel that Brexit coming near the end of 2020 is also driving these trends as well. I'm not sure, Steve, if you've had any sort of like questions or worries from your customers, but I feel Brexit is playing a big part too in these trends.
Yeah, I think 100%. You know, I think the Brexit effect, as I've heard it said, is, you know, there's a lot of areas where I think because the UK now is out of the EU and businesses in the UK want to have an international standard that's recognised globally, and an ISO standard is a perfect thing. So I think that the effect of Brexit has had an effect on the interest levels, certainly within 27001, 9001, because it is a global standard, as everybody knows, and internationally recognized. So businesses feel, I think, more confident that investing in an ISO standard will help them in the new European markets, will help them in the new global markets as well, which, you know, obviously IMSM, we help organizations globally around 18 different countries, and you know, it's recognizable. And I think the Brexit effect has definitely had seen an upturn in interest as well. Now, whether we run another survey next year that says what has the most influence over ISOs for you around Brexit, or was it COVID, I think there'll be some interesting stats coming from that. But I think, yeah, 100%.
We'll be monitoring the market and creating new surveys. So guys, certainly in a couple of months you'll get further information on what's going on. We'll share it with you. Angela, Stephen, do you mind if we conclude the session with this here?
Yeah.
No,
we're good to go now?
Yeah, ready to go.
Thanks for joining. Thanks again. And marketing, over to you guys.